First things first, if you are new to this channel and haven't seen any of my previous videos, yes, I am aware that I am massively late on these shows. I don't need this pointed out to me. I had a lot going on in my life over the past year and a half. Sometimes things just slip by. I kind of missed Luke Cage when it came out, so I didn't watch Iron Fist when it came out. I haven't seen Defenders yet because I hadn't watched Luke Cage or Iron Fist, and I think you get the idea. Also, as of this recording, I have only seen the first 2 episodes of Luke Cage and Iron Fist. So, no, I don't know what happens in the rest of the series. I'm going to find out over the next series of videos. This is helping to fill some time because the week this will be coming out, there's really nothing coming out in the movie theater to review. There's just Insidious 4, and I haven't seen Insidious 3. So, yeah, I kind of need something to kind of help hit that magical YouTube algorithm. Anyway, yes, this is my thoughts on the first couple episodes of Luke Cage and the first couple episodes of Iron Fist. Okay, starting things off is the first episode of Luke Cage, The Moment of Truth. You're getting it all. This is the place. This is the I'm sorry, I had to do it. Anyway, a group of men in a New York City barber shop are arguing about the Knicks. So, yes, we are definitely set in New York, which is weird because the show takes place in Brooklyn, and you think at some point they would talk about the Nets, but whatever. Anyway, Luke is working there. Luke Cage is working at the barber shop. Basically, he's kind of a custodian. He just sweeps up the hair that's clipped onto the floor. It's run by a man named Pops, who works as sort of a youth outreach type of guy, helping bring in troubled youths, training them to become barbers, trying to keep them off the streets. Anyway, Luke also works nights at a club owned by Cornell Cottonmouth Stokes, so he doesn't like to be called Cottonmouth, and his cousin is named Mariah Ballard, and she is a high-ranking city councilwoman. And even though Ballard gives the position, Mariah Ballard gives the public face of being clean, she's still working with her family on a lot of things. She actually took city funds to help Cottonmouth build the nightclub that Cage is also working at as a dishwasher. But he eventually winds up filling in as a bartender, as the guy he's working for. I can't think what his name is. I want to say it's Jermaine. Was called in sick. Turns out he's not actually sick, but we'll get to that. As he's tending bar, he meets an NYPD detective named Misty Knight. Misty Knight is a character from the comics, as many of you know. Pretty much everyone, except for Pops, and I haven't been able to figure out if he is, but pretty much everyone that I'm mentioning in here is involved in the comics in some way. Misty Knight is a character from mainly a black and white magazine that Marvel put out in the 1970s. She also appeared in the Luke Cage and Iron Fist, or Power Man and Iron Fist, to be more precise, book. It is kind of funny because Misty Knight actually winds up becoming a girlfriend of Danny Rand. We'll also talk about the person she works with in the team called the Daughters of the Dragon, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Anyway, basically, the bartender that Cage is filling in for is working with 2 other guys, both of whom were at the barber shop earlier, one as a client and the other as a, barber, basically, as he was cutting hair. Chico was the one who was working at the barber shop with Pops and Luke, and Shamik is kind of the ringleader of this group. They wind up breaking up a deal that Cottonmouth had made with another group, a sort of rival gang in New York City. They were brokering some sort of, it's possibly a drug deal, it's not entirely sure, but they wind up stealing most of Cottonmouth's money. Eventually word gets back to Cottonmouth. Also, in the midst of this, Shamik basically turns on Jermaine and shoots him a couple of times, leaving Jermaine to die, but Jermaine manages to make one last phone call to the higher-ups to explain what happened. And as a result, Shamik and Cottonmouth are basically kind of on the run. Let's see. As this point happens, a man named Shades arrives. And it turns out Shades was actually in jail with Luke Cage. I guess I didn't talk too much about Luke's backstory. They don't go too far into it. It's kind of similar to the comics, but I don't think they go into it fully. Like, they talk about he was in jail and he was being beaten and it was rough. He was in jail in Savannah, Georgia, and yet he was originally from Brooklyn because there are people there who seem to know who he is. They even call him Luke, but not Carl Lucas, which is his real name. And here's the funny thing. They don't mention at all where it is he got his powers from. Which, if you don't know the comics, basically this was one of the up-teen times they tried to recreate the Captain America Super Soldier Serum. Through it all, basically it was a racist guard at the prison who cranked up the formula thinking it was going to kill Cage, and instead it just kind of gave it made him not so much stronger than Captain America, but tougher than Captain America with the unbreakable skin. Anyway, Shades was in jail with Luke, and so Lucas, every time he sees Shades, he tries to sort of hide himself as best he can, so hopefully he doesn't seem to recognize them. He does not seem to recognize him just yet. But Shades is also working for a higher-up in the, I hesitate to say mafia gang member type hierarchy, but basically another sort of gang lord kingpin type, not the kingpin, but a kingpin type named Diamondback. Now, yes, I do know a bit about Diamondback, but we'll get to that when he pops up in the show. Basically, Shades was sent by Diamondback to kind of see, like, hey, is Cottonmouth working straight here? What's going on? Is he, these were his men pulling this maneuver, so is he trying to screw me out of something? And no, it's not that. Anyway, they get Shamik. They bring him in because he was hanging out in a strip joint. Shamik basically gets beaten to death by Cottonmouth. He just pounds him into the ground. And Luke then, basically throughout this whole time, Pops has been talking to Luke and saying, you could be so much more than this. You should be fighting for these people. They need someone to look up to. You're the type of person they can look up to. But Luke's kind of, just kind of not that. This does take place after Jessica Jones does. He makes a few references. He doesn't reference the bar that blew up, but he does reference Jessica shooting him at one point. And Pops does seem to realize something about Luke. I don't know if he knows everything, but yeah, he definitely knows that Luke is super strong and super tough. And he keeps calling him Power Man, as a matter of fact. Anyway, as this was basically as that's happening, Lucas lives above a Chinese restaurant. One night, some hoods come in there trying to basically run a protection racket. Turns out they're actually working for Mariah Ballard. Interesting little point there. Excuse me. Anyway, they're working for Mariah Ballard, but he goes down there and he finally just has his fill of it and he starts throwing them around, and they actually try, as he defeats all of them, they actually try to pay back the restaurateurs, who are also his landlords, try to pay back his rent. He's like, no, just keep it. He's like, are you kidding? And they're like, you don't understand. You need to get out of here because now they'll just send more. And that's kind of how it ends. Okay, before we get into the second episode, I have a correction to make. I said Mariah Ballard, it's Mariah Dillard. Okay, and yes, I know it's a character from the comics named Black Mariah. Anyway, going into the second episode, Code of the Streets. Basically, Cottonmouth and Shades and their other lackey, whose name just kind of I never really paid attention to, come into the barbershop. They're looking for Chico, but also Cottonmouth has an appointment. Basically, the barbershop is, as Pops call it, Switzerland for the gangs. It's a neutral territory where there isn't supposed to be any violence, where everything's kind of peaceful and everything can get done, and business can get done without any harm. Turns out Chico is hiding out in a motel. Pops basically sends out Luke to go find Chico and try to bring him in, so maybe they can make a parlay and Chico won't get killed, as long as Chico tells his part of the story, but there'll be more to it after that. Luke does go out to search for Chico, but basically Chico does not want to come doesn't want to come, and that's how everything goes. The police, meanwhile, Misty Knight included, and her partner Rafe, that's all I remember his name being, they find Germain's body. They're conducting an investigation of their own. They look for Chico. Now, basically, I didn't quite mention in the first episode, but yeah, Misty and Luke sleep together for one night. So when they come in, things kind of get a little awkward. He doesn't openly say, they don't kind of get open about it, but Pops puts two and two together. He knows Misty from back in the day. The barbershop's like a neighborhood, obviously. If you know anything about African American culture, the barbershop is an important kind of meeting ground for a lot of things. As this is happening, Chico actually does decide to come back. He comes in through the back way. It's at this point, someone named Turk, yes, I know Turk is a lackey from Daredevil. He's in the Daredevil comics. He was in the Daredevil TV show, the Netflix show. He's basically a low-level worm for the Fisk organization. He gets his... and because of that, Daredevil will often just kick the living tar out of him and pump him for information. But Turk managed to catch a glimpse of Chico as he's looking for the restroom. Turk was hanging out there because I believe his uncle or his father hangs out at the barbershop and they play chess the whole time. But Turk basically gets in contact with Cottonmouth and says, hey, I know where Chico is. Around the same time, though, Luke has also gotten in contact with Cottonmouth. He basically walks in there. Pop sends him because they're trying to get a parlay for a peaceful resolution to this. However, I think the guy's name was Tony, Cottonmouth's chief underling, basically goes into business for his own, decides to confront Chico on his he brings Shades along, but they decided to confront Chico, and Shades tries to don't do anything stupid, don't shoot this place up. Shock of shocks, he winds up shooting the place up. Pops is killed, Chico is killed, a couple other people are wounded. Luke basically shields a kid from getting shot, and that's kind of how the episode sort of ends. Well, there's one more thing. Basically, they go back, and Cottonmouth both Mariah and Cottonmouth are not pleased that this happened because they were in deep. Exactly, like, again, the barbershop was Switzerland. Also, Pops had a background with Cottonmouth. He sort of helped, for lack of a term, raise him in the criminal underworld. Pops was part of it. He got busted. He went to jail for 10 years. But there's still kind of like a mutual respect in that area, and you just ruined that. So they're meeting up on a roof. Cottonmouth grabs him and throws Tony over the side of the ledge onto the car below. Mariah Dillard is there too. The reason why Mariah was so concerned about the money, I actually said earlier, Mariah took city funds to fund the building of Cottonmouth's nightclub. Well, there's going to be an audit to those, and that money needs to kind of be there, or else there's going to be trouble. That's what the whole deal with the rival gang was supposed to do. It was supposed to bring a little more money for everyone. But now that that got broken up, she needs money to help cover everything, and so they need to get the money back. And that's what happens. She basically kind of hightails it out of there, plays the I didn't see anything card. I was not here. And the episode ends as Pops is dying. He kind of makes Luke promise to maybe start fighting for his own. Luke goes to the Dillard organization, where the campaign headquarters for them, which is in this one building. He gets sort of confronted by someone, basically proves that he has bulletproof skin, and that's how the episode ends. The end of that episode was a little weak, but overall it's definitely a very strong start to this series. Definitely, I like the way the villains are set up. I mean, the villains are villains in this. There's not really a lot of wishy-washy borderline stuff. Like, yeah, they might be working to better the community, but they're bettering the community by their own personal gain. We have a crooked councilwoman on here. We have excuse me, a Kingpin type character, who is actually underling to another Kingpin character. So, like I said, I know that character shows up later, Diamondback, but we'll cover that when we cover that. So yeah, overall, I am liking the first 2 episodes of Luke Cage. Okay, so we'll take a quick break and then we'll do Iron Fist.
Nice. I'm looking good. Uh-oh.
Missed your mark once again, Hawkeye.
Just having a little fun, Ultron.
I'll show you how to have fun.
I'll take you, Drew. Save it for the series.
The Avengers premieres in just a few minutes on Fox Kids.
Something new is shaking from Chef Boyardee, and kids everywhere are getting into it. New Spider-Man pasta.
Whoa! Come on, let's show Mysterio the ropes, kid. Hello! Looks like he'll be hanging around for a while.
Totally webbed out Spider-Man shape smothered in secret sauce. New Spider-Man pasta from Chef Boyardee. So hot, it's practically radioactive. Thank goodness for Chef Boyardee.
Okay, and now we move on to the first episode of Iron Fist, Snow Gives Way. We open up with Danny Rand walking through the streets of New York City completely barefoot. He eventually arrives at the Rand Enterprises headquarters and goes up to the reception area to ask to talk to Harold Meacham. Security immediately shows up to try to throw him out. He fights them off and begins to make his way up to the top of the office. Harold Meacham isn't in charge anymore. He's passed away. He passed away from cancer a few years earlier, and his children, Ward and Joy, are. But Danny knows them because they were friends since childhood. But they don't believe that this is Danny Rand because Danny Rand died 15 years ago in a plane crash. And so Danny Rand is thrown out again. Basically, this first episode is kind of Danny's misadventures as he returns to New York City. He meets up with a possibly homeless thief who's also a drug addict who has an iPhone, so he's able to look up some information going on. He briefly goes back to the Rand estate, which turns out Joy is living in. I don't know if Ward's also living there, but yeah, Joy definitely lives there. He sort of confronts Joy again the next day. At this point, he's almost run over by a taxi cab, but he flips up over. He basically does a big cartwheel over it and is unhurt. He goes to Central Park for a while, tries to meditate, and it's there that he sees this woman hanging up posters for an instructional martial arts course, particularly in Kendo, and this is Colleen Wing. Now, if you remember obviously going into the earlier in the review with Luke Cage, Colleen Wing is Misty Knight's partners in the Daughters of the Dragon. Like I said, that was they popped up a lot in the Luke Cage and Iron Fist comics in the 70s, but they also had a run of their own adventures in Marvel's Black and White magazines. If you don't know, when people talk about the Marvel Black and White magazines, basically Marvel put out comics as these large format black and white magazines. The reason they did them, I don't know why they did them necessarily in black and white, but I guess it was to make them a bit more literate. But the reason they did them as magazines is because magazines were not subject to the Comics Code Authority. And so they could get away with a little bit more violence, a little bit more sex. They definitely skewed very mature. Like I said, Colleen Wing was Misty Knight's partner in the Daughters of the Dragon, so it makes sense that she pops up here. Like I said, basically the first episode is just his wacky misadventures. He does return once more to Rand Enterprises to confront Ward Meacham again. It still sort of blows up in his face. They just get into a fight. He tries to bring out things that only Danny Rand would know, and Ward still really doesn't believe him. In fact, Ward actually denies a few of the incidents actually happened. At one point, he goes... basically, one of the other things, too, I forgot to briefly mention, this is Danny pops up and returns mysteriously as Rand Enterprises is about to expand into the lucrative Chinese market, and it seems very obvious. It seems oddly coincidental that someone who would own 51% of Rand Enterprises would suddenly show up when they're about to make a whole boatload of money. So, oh yeah. Anyway, later on, Danny kind of tries to go on the run again. He goes to Colleen's dojo. He kind of asks, like, hey, could I work here as a trainer? Could I just something? She sort of politely declines, but she does give him a pair of shoes finally. As he leaves, he's jumped by a security team from Rand Enterprises. Colleen sort of sees this outside and kind of tails behind him. It sees him take down several of the security men, and they all say that Ward Meacham sent them. Now, here's the thing, excuse me, that Ward is covering. I don't think Joy is in on it. She doesn't seem to tip off, at least not in the first couple episodes. It turns out that Harold Meacham is actually still alive, and basically he's like this super recluse. He almost never goes out. He stays in hiding. He wants the world to think he's dead. But he also knows about this Danny Rand visitor who's been popping up, and he doesn't entirely disbelieve that he might be Danny Rand. And it's not exactly explained why, but anyway, the next morning, Danny managed to sneak into Rand Enterprises again. He grew up in the building, so he knows a lot of the nooks and crannies that he can slip around in, and he manages to confront Joy. As he's trying to explain to Joy everything that happened, he suddenly passes out because it turns out Joy drugged his tea, and when Danny comes to, he's in an insane asylum, and that ends the first episode.
Would that be my spider sense returning? Who's that? He's back. Way to go. Don't let those overgrown tin men keep you down. What? Just too many of the big guys for you, buddy. Hold on tight.
Can Spidey handle the Sentinel's blast?
Whoa.
Grab a copy of this month's Spider-Man. Marvel Comics, it's mayhem for your mind.
Okay, and now the second episode, Shadowhawk Takes Flight, begins with Danny coming to once more in the mental asylum. There's a doctor in there with them. They start talking, and then the doctor suddenly tells Danny to try that the only solution is for him to kill himself. And Danny's like, what? And then it turns out this is a patient posing as the doctor who is now trying to kill Danny for some reason. Eventually, Danny gets sedated one more time. He comes to again, and a real doctor is in the office, and they begin talking. Danny relates the story again. The plane crashed in the Himalayas. His mother was sucked out as the plane was going down. His father was dying in the crash, but Danny knew eventually that he had to leave him and try to survive on his own. Danny collapsed in the snow, and it was then that two warrior monks from the Order of the Crane Mother found him. However, the doctor says that this isn't the case, that Danny's actual name is John Anderson, and shows him a passport to prove it. The passport is from a man from Toronto. Basically, a lot of the episode is sort of Danny being sedated and coming out of it and trying to explain things and then being sedated. At one point, he does manage to get a message out to Colleen Wing, and she's unsure if she wants to help. But it turns out the Meacham family has cameras set up at the asylum, so they know everything that's been going on. And so Harold dispatches Ward to go confront Colleen. All this really does, though, is arouse her suspicions that something's going on. Basically, Ward makes an offer to Colleen to say, hey, we'll help fund your dojo so you don't lose money, you don't go out of business, it will give you a nice spruce up so you're warm and get a few more people in. And it's like, okay, the fact that you're trying to get me to condemn this person saying he's Danny Rand, she's left unsure. Anyway, Harold goes, as this is happening, Harold actually manages to slip out briefly and confronts a heavily sedated Danny Rand, who talks about he visited the city of Kunlun. He is the Iron Fist who is meant to destroy the Hand. and this kind of leaves Harold a little shaken. He sort of walks off. He tells his assistant, who kind of keeps popping up throughout all of this, that to look up as much information. As they return back to basically his safe house, he finds this big message on the window written, "Where were you?" And then there's a big handprint underneath it. Anyway, Colleen manages to visit Danny, and like I said, she has the papers that Meacham wanted her to sign. But as this had happened a little earlier, throughout basically the second half of the first episode, and pretty much all of this one, Joy starts to arouse some suspicions that maybe this is Danny Rand and it's not him faking. The Doctor also kind of begins to conclude this as well, because Danny starts bringing something up. They actually watched this old commercial for Rand Enterprises that everyone was in, and Danny talked about he hated making that commercial, and the only way he would do it is if his parents took him to the circus at Madison Square Garden. Now, Joy also knew this, because, again, and this kind of both piques their both suspicions, and it turns out when they were kids, and they would have M&Ms, and Danny would go through and he would pick out all the brown M&Ms. And it was something that only Danny and Joy would do. They would go through and they'd just pick out all the brown M&Ms in a bag of M&Ms. And now I find myself craving M&Ms, I'm sorry. Anyway, she sends him a big bag of M&Ms at the asylum. He goes through and he actually picks out all the brown M&Ms. He then sends back the rest of the M&Ms without the brown M&Ms in there. And this kind of makes her finally realize that, yes, this is Danny. Danny sent the M&Ms back with Colleen. Colleen shows up and basically refuses to sign the papers to condemn Danny. Anyway, the Doctor then talks to Danny. He says, "You know what? I'm going to believe you actually are Danny Rand." And Danny explains that he stole the passport because that was the only way he could get back into the States, was with the passport. And it's then that Danny once more starts to talk about Kunlun and being the immortal Iron Fist, and how he needs to concentrate his ki, he keeps saying chi, into his fist so that he can be super strong and knock people out. And that kind of makes the Doctor go, what? And suddenly is not going to release him. Eventually, Harold at this point contacts Ward and says, yeah, we need to get Danny out of there. He could help us. He could actually be a useful tool against the Hand. We need to keep him safe. But Ward instead just basically sends some goons to beat up Danny. And there's actually one other inmate of the asylum who I think they said he killed his father. I forget which inmate he was, but basically they all confront him in this padded room. He's in a straitjacket. They're beating on him, but that eventually manages to allow Danny to focus his ki enough that he had activated enough of the Iron Fist that he blows down a couple walls and escapes the asylum. And that's how the episode ends. Okay, so thoughts on, at least my initial thoughts on Iron Fist. For the most part, it's okay. I do understand a lot of the problems people have had with this show. It is a little too padded out. I think people wanted more kind of like a Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee martial arts epic, and not guy wandering around New York City. And that's kind of the problem. Like, the first episode is padded out with the wacky misadventures of Danny Rand, and the second episode is padded out with Danny Rand in the insane asylum. It's really slowly paced. Like I said, I will be watching the rest of these, so I'm in for the rest of this as long as it lasts. But yeah, it started to feel like a bit of a chore about halfway through the first episode. I can't really say it's terrible, though. I like Colleen Wing. The brief bits of martial arts fight choreography in there are pretty well done. I actually like a lot of the lighting in this. I think it's pretty well lit. It's not like, part of the problem, I think Daredevil was a little too underlit. Like, I get the idea that maybe he's blind, but it seems like it was just perpetually dark outside. At least this case, you know, it looks bright when he's out in Central Park. It looks, you know, it's still kind of very gleaming in New York City in that aspect. But yeah. Okay, so anyway, yeah. See you all next time. Hey guys, is there a movie you want me to tackle? If it's some stinker like Baywatch or the Emoji Movie or something else? Check out my Patreon at Sleepy Time for Cat Productions. See how you can make that happen.